Good morning and welcome everyone to the second event in the series Detroit Counts 2020. My name is Mike Hawthorne and I have the honor of being the host and moderator of this event. Today's event is titled Seeing the Census. Our presenters will be Alex Hill of Wayne State University's Urban Studies Department and Amanda Tickner, Michigan State Librarian and Subject Specialist in Anthropology, Landscape Architecture, and Urban Planning. Our first event in the series, Why the Census, focused on why the census is critically important to just about every aspect of American life. Our presenters touched on its impact on education, urban planning, suburban planning, housing, healthcare, and a host of other areas important to Americans' well-being. Today, Alex and Amanda will walk us through how the census data is used in mapping to help planners and policymakers. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. This is a community event, so welcome all, and we're grateful for all comers. First, everyone will be muted by default. Second, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat window and I will address them after all the speakers have concluded their presentations. Third, we are monitoring the platform for any activities we may feel distract from the presenters. Anyone engaging in such activities will be booted. So if your intent is to be a distractor, please consider self-booting. We will open the series hearing from one of the series. We will open the event with hearing from one of the series planners, Megan Courtney, who is the outreach archivist here at Wayne State's Ruther Labor Library. Afterwards, Megan will introduce Alex. With that said, on behalf of John Cawthorn, Dean of Wayne State University Libraries, and Joseph Salem, Dean of Michigan State Libraries, welcome all. Megan.
Hello, everyone. I am happy to be able to welcome you to our second event in this series today. And as Mike said, this one's going to be all about mapping. And I think one of the notes we wanted to make throughout this series is obviously doing this kind of work at this moment. It's kind of an interesting time to see all the different connections between something that some people may see as sort of dry, something like census data, and the actual things happening in our community, activism, people trying to improve their communities, looking for the reasons that inequality happens. And some of that can be found in the collection of the data and the government uses to understand the communities and how we can serve them. So we're really excited to be able to do this work at this moment. And I think one of our first speakers here, Alex Hill, when I met him, he was working for the Public Health Department for the city of Detroit, and now he is with the Center for Urban Studies at Wayne State University. He also runs Detroitography, which, if you haven't seen it, is an amazing blog that focuses specifically on maps. I'm sure he'll touch on that a little bit and tell you more about it. But we're excited to have him talk a little bit about his work and understanding those connections between sort of data and visualizations of data and the real people that those things affect.
Great, thanks so much. So I'm going to share. I'm pretty much just going to share a bunch of maps. So let me know if I'm good.
It looks good to me.
Awesome. So, and I say this is asking weird questions because that's kind of how I started working with the census and mapping in Detroit. I was new to the city and I needed to really understand kind of where I was, what was happening, and the best place that I had to go was the census. So this is going to be a whole bunch of maps that appear on Detroitography. So you can visit and follow along if you'd like, or just watch the slides. Let me see if I can advance. So I'm going to kind of throw this into three main buckets, looking at using census data to map for people, problems, and plans. The census is really kind of the baseline that we have. There's a lot of discussion about, the collection of census data and its limitations, and the fact that the majority of Detroit is a hard to count area. So we have low response rates, but it's still kind of our go-to baseline data set for understanding who is where, and what kind of issues people are facing in their communities. So for people, one map that, so this is actually one that policymakers really enjoyed, which I just did it for the visual effect, looking at where there's more children versus where there's more elderly folks in a particular area of the city. It's not, not to say that there's absolutely more children. It could be pretty close to 50-50, but this is one when you're thinking about targeting services for particular populations, using census data to identify where there's a high number of those folks in your target population. Census is where you go. Also, you can look at things where people with different education levels are across the city. So here you can see kind of in the northern central area of the map there, where there's a lot of graduate degrees. That's the University District, Palmer Woods, also where income is much higher in the city. Another that has been enjoyed by a lot of people is looking at the most common country of origin. So, from the census, this data is collected. I know, most recently the citizenship question has been a concern, but this is a little bit different. Just kind of asking people where they came from with their immigration status. So, it's very easy. We can identify Mexican town in Detroit, and that population has been there since, it's been dense in that area at least since the 1950s, but you can also see other areas of the city where different immigrant communities have kind of centralized. So in northern Detroit, you can see the Chaldean community, with the country of origin being Iraq. There's surprisingly a high number of folks from Jamaica who've immigrated to Detroit. If you go to Northwest Detroit, you can find some really great Jamaican food. Diving into thinking about problems. So I guess this is where some of that kind of policy intersection might be. Because again, the census is really our baseline for understanding where people are and where kind of particular social determinants highlight in different areas of the city. One in particular, so this map was actually used while I was at the health department, and we were trying to make sure we had materials that were translated, and then trying to also understand to what degree we needed to distribute materials that were translated in Spanish versus materials that were translated in Arabic. So the census, with their question about languages spoken at home, gave us some good direction kind of in where to go and where to think. You can see, though, there are people who speak both Spanish and Arabic kind of spread out across the entire city. So the other, this has kind of been a recurring topic in Detroit, is transportation and vehicle access. So some of these areas where there's low vehicle access, there's also high vacancy rates. But, this gives you kind of a snapshot with that census data to understand that baseline of where do we need to think more about targeting transportation solutions, or where are people really unable to get a further distance to a resource, be it a health clinic or a grocery store. The other kind of ongoing problem in Detroit is water shutoffs. And so using census data, this is from 2014. So we were able to pull kind of the median income data from the census to try to estimate where folks were seeing a high percentage of their income impacting from their water bill. I also want to highlight really quick, thinking about historic census data. So right now through the census, I think you can only go as far back as the year 2000 in data that you can access. But there's a project out of the University of Minneapolis called the National Historic GIS. And they are kind of collecting, cleaning, and making it easier to map historic census data. So this one pulls in data from the Green Book, which was, most recently adapted into a film. But the the Schomburg Center, I believe, in New York has this great archive of all the Green Books. If you're unfamiliar, it was a book published so that Black Americans could find safe accommodations while they were traveling across the country, and whether that was a hotel or a restaurant or what have you. So this map in particular looks at density of African American residents in Detroit compared with those Green Book locations. So the last section I'll talk about is plans. And this is one where I'll pull in kind of some of what is happening more recently. So I am a researcher with the Urban Health Research Group at the Center for Urban Studies. And I'm also the GIS director for the Center for Translational Science and Clinical Research Innovation through the School of Medicine. And our team was doing a lot of the mobile testing with our partners at Access. And so we were really leaning on census data to better understand those things like low vehicle access, high poverty rates, areas where people were really going to be very vulnerable. So especially kind of the elderly population was one where we knew that testing was going to be critical. So this data, so both, it pulls in kind of those age categories for the population, but then we also rely on, it's called the Social Vulnerability Index. So the Centers for Disease Control developed, I think I have another map. I always get ahead of myself. Whoops. There we go. So the Social Vulnerability Index, it creates 4 broad themes based on a bunch of different census indicators. So this kind of national health work really couldn't happen without the census. So, here in particular, this is just kind of the percentiles for all those different indicators across the city. So you can see where there's more vulnerability and less vulnerability across the city. And this is something, so in that kind of social determinants of health area, there are so many different indices that people have created. They predominantly rely on census data to develop those. So you can see, they pull together some 300 different indicators, majority from the census, but the top 6 across all social determinants indices use these different census indicators for poverty levels, poverty rates for children, unemployment, graduation rates, health insurance coverage, and median income. Then, we also want to think about utilizing the census for things like normalizing new data. So the coronavirus cases that were coming in, we could easily, count all the cases in a particular zip code, but what we really want to know is how many cases there are compared to the population. So, here this map relies on census data to be able to normalize the data to show, what does that look like per population. And kind of similarly, thinking about things like urban agriculture in Detroit. This map was actually used by Keep Growing Detroit to think about where they could target and add more members to their garden collaborative. So, just looking at density of population was something helpful for them to think about, you know, where they should go, where they should spend time, knocking on doors versus where they were not likely to reach a lot of people. And I think that's all I got. Yep.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you, Alex. Amanda?
All right. So let's see. I guess I will kind of reintroduce myself a little bit to start with. So I am the urban planning, yes, all of those liaison things. If you give my full title, I sound like the Duchess of York. It is kind of ridiculous. But my primary job is I am the GIS librarian at MSU. So I work in the map library and I am helping people with GIS problems and giving workshops and helping people find data and helping people deal with getting software, getting started with GIS. I occasionally make maps for people. This isn't something I do very often because I prefer the teach a person to fish. I like to teach. So I want everyone to make maps. That's kind of the deal, and analyze data, because that's the other thing a GIS does. So geographic information systems layer data together in software to do analyses and make maps. So today, oh, and I should say also, I do this for all kinds of subjects. So I am agnostic as to who I help with GIS stuff. And everyone always assumes that geographers are coming to see me, but geographers know how to do this. So I almost never see geographers. It's almost always historians, social workers, people from the social work program. That's probably my most extensive population and the one that I use that uses census data. So just all over the place, urban planners, fish and wildlife, just all kinds of subjects use geographic information systems. So I help all kinds of people with all of that stuff. So if you have questions, because most people don't understand what a GIS librarian does. And I'm basically like, I will help you. Anything GIS. So in the spirit of liking to teach, and I don't necessarily have my own research, so I'm not going to talk about my own research, but I do want to make you guys able to find and use your own census data. That is, I like to teach, and that is what I'm going to try and do today, and show you some maps. So I'm going to share my screen, and this is like where things get scary because I'm doing this all in web browser apps. And we know how that goes. So things were crashing earlier when I was testing them, and we'll see how this all rolls. So share screen here. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Uh-oh.
Hang on one second. Michael, can you make her a co-host? Then she'll be able to. Sorry about that. Okay, there you go. Should work.
Okay. Oops. Share screen. Ah, yes, very good. Okay. Share. Okay, so here we are. Okay. This is the first thing I wanted to show you because I think it's kind of fun and it highlights something that Alex mentioned, which is response rates to the census. So the census also has a response rate. I'll show you that too. But what's nice about this one is that these folks have done a lot of different geographies for the response rates, which is a lot finer grained than the actual census site, and I kind of like it better. So this is for Wayne County, and you can see that this was the 2010 rate, and this is where we're at for the 2020 census, which is a lot lower, which you'd expect because COVID, right? The sort of getting out, knocking on doors, getting people to do the census is not happening. However, it is, I guess, sort of lucky this year that for the first time, the census is being collected online. That is new. And it was very controversial for kind of reasons of access and privacy issues. There's a lot of things that were controversial about going online. But they managed it. They were very much under the gun, and they had multiple directors over the last 5 years and they did it. So it's online now, and that will hopefully help. But you can see here that the Upper Peninsula, the response rates are far lower than the rest of the state. And that's an issue when you're looking at census data, and Alex mentioned it in regards to Detroit. Low response rates can kind of skew the data a little bit. And also things like prisons and other kind of institutions can kind of skew your population rates and things also. So just something to be aware of. Mostly, but as Alex did say, it is the best thing we have, for sure, for a lot of reasons. It's very thorough and well collected. So this is okay, census.gov. This is the census own site. Kind of scared to click because it's been crashing. So kind of similar thing, but. So that's a little bit about response rates. You can see some maps there. Now I'm going to get to this, which was what was really, really crashing. So this is where you can actually download and access data, and it's very easy. And they just recently changed this interface. So I think it's gotten simpler in some ways and more complicated in other ways. But since if you're unfamiliar with the past one, you won't have anything to compare it to. Doesn't matter. So exploring census data. If you just search for census data, this is the first thing that will pop up. So advanced search. Let's do this thing. So the first thing, oh, and I never use the basic search. It's crazy town. Just go straight to the advanced search. It's easier, in my opinion. So these are your filters. So this is how you can kind of narrow down what you're getting. And I originally was going to kind of call out and have us pick some things, but I was having so much trouble with it crashing that I think I'm just going to pick the very simplest variables and hope for the best. Let's see. Let's do populations and people. This is the one that worked the best. Okay. Geography. You can see they have all kinds of geographies. It's just crazy things. And the nice one that they've added some, which I think is great. Voting district, traffic analysis zones, which I'm not sure what that means, but they've got a lot of stuff. You can see different legislative districts. So this is valuable data in a variety, sort of sliced and diced in a variety of ways for a variety of people. Zip codes. They do include zip codes. I'm kind of on a campaign to warn people off of zip codes. Zip codes are meant for delivering mail. And that means they work on roads. A road is not a polygon. A road is just a straight line. And so to try and make a road into a district like a state or a census tract, is tricky. And they sort of estimate these things in weird ways. Zip codes are not well suited to kind of population shapes, and they can obfuscate data really, really easily. And that was one of the things that happened in the Flint water crisis. Initially, some of the folks from the EPA were using data that was done on zip codes, and that completely obscured the severity of the problem. So just, there are reasons to use zip codes occasionally, like let's say you're doing a survey by mail. Okay, maybe then you're going to use a zip code because you want to be consistent with how you collected your survey data. But ultimately, if you can possibly avoid it, don't do it. So there's my public service announcement for the day about zip codes. So I'm definitely not picking zip codes here. I'm going to do county. And I'm going to do Michigan because we're in Michigan. Why not? And we hope it doesn't crash. Come on, load. You can do it. I believe in you, census.gov. Okay, maybe I don't believe in you, census.gov. All right, I'm going to try clearing the filter. Yes, start over. Okay. Okay, there it went. So years, as Alex also mentioned, the census itself, this website does not go back past 2000. So if you want historical data, I have two sources of it, one of which Alex mentioned. I'm going to show you that actual website, and another one which is called Social Explorer. So it's kind of an issue, and the longitudinal nature of the census is kind of frustrating because on one level you think, oh, the same stuff was collected for the last 200 years on these decadal marks. But no, because the questions change. And then the geography changes. I'll talk about that in a second. And so it's comparable, but not directly comparable in all cases. Population is usually safe. But sometimes they change the way they collect different demographic information. And they'll change, maybe like 1970, they did this weird thing with how they collected income. So they binned it in a really strange way. It was very frustrating on the project I worked on. Couldn't figure out how to deal with that. So the government is collecting census data for its own purposes, and it doesn't always match with research purposes, unfortunately. So I'm just going to pick 2010 because I know it's there, and we've already got all of that. So search, next step. And this is another place where it crashes. Please load. Oh, yay, you loaded, kind of. You really gonna load? Oh yeah, okay, good. Okay, so total population, you can see you got table. When you download the table, okay, for GIS purposes, having this, it needs to be pivoted. So for mapping purposes, you usually want your locations in a column, and you want your data up on top. Fortunately, when you do the data download, it lets you set that pivot. So you don't have to do a lot of fancy footwork in Excel, which is great. And it comes down a lot more simply than what this looks like. But then what I did want to show you is, even if you're not a GIS user, and I'm assuming most of the people on this webinar are not GIS users, which is why I sort of try to keep things simple here, you can use the website to actually map things. So this is total population. You can see the concentration around Detroit, and I did it again by counties. So this is the counties. Let me see where, it was hiding under the Zoom thing. So customize map. You can see how it's got this. I just want to quickly show you this so I can make another public service announcement about making what's this type of map. It's taking a step back from when you have a single variable and you have color shades like this. It's called a choropleth map. Okay. So we can customize our choropleth map here within the census's website. If we really hate blue, we could change that. But what I wanted to show is that they have a lot of color palettes here. And you want to be careful when you're making choropleth maps, especially if things like when you're making a choropleth map, you're using a single variable usually. You're using population or something that varies from 0 or whatever number it is to another number. Okay. When you're making these maps, usually you want to use one color in a graduated way. The reason is because your variable is varying across a space continuously, right? Sometimes you want to use a split color ramp, but you should have a good reason for doing that. So maybe it's a map of temperatures and you have below 0 and above 0. Okay, that's a good reason to use a split color ramp. Maybe it is a map of people above and below a poverty level. Okay, then maybe you use a split color ramp. The reason you want to be cautious about using a split color ramp is that you can be really, and actually this is the PSA part of this, the public service announcement part of this. When you see a split color ramp, pay attention to what data is being depicted and why they selected that. Because sometimes split color ramps are used to exaggerate differences. So the difference between red and green looks really big on a map. They're opposites. So you're presenting this as a scale where there's some strong difference. But if you do that with population, it varies continuously. Maybe that's not quite an accurate way. That extreme of differences is not present. I have a really funny map that I used to demonstrate this, and I couldn't find it because it's at my work computer, which I don't have access to. But on that map, it is a map of the East Lansing area, and it shows alcohol consumption or flavored alcohol consumption in the last 6 months by census tract. The census does not collect that. That's from a business database. But the upshot being is it actually doesn't vary that much it's about a percentage difference. It's a tiny amount. But by using a split color ramp, I could make that look like there was a huge difference in the preferences of beverages around East Lansing. And I'm sorry that I couldn't show you that map because it's fun. But upshot being, be deliberate in your choice of colors and ramps and bins. So unfortunately, from the data.gov, this site, census.gov, we can't download this map very easily. Notice the download button is not. Click on it, nothing happens. Very sad. So you can't download it as a shapefile, which is the bread and butter of kind of GIS systems, and so that's super frustrating. What you can download is the table, the data table. And you can do a screenshot of this. So if you want to make a map here and use it on something, you can do a screenshot, and it's government. And so usually it's not really copyrighted. I think it's okay. Although that is something you want to be aware of when you're using maps, is copyright.